Freddie's story begins on September 5, 1946. That day marked the new year for India's Parsi community, and it was also the day he was born on the Zanzibar archipelago in Africa. His father worked as a civil servant on the island, while his mother came from Western India. Overall, his family was well off. Much of Freddie's childhood was spent by the beach. He attended the best missionary school on the island and was cared for by household servants. For 8 years, he lived a carefree life on the island, until one day, a decision made by his mother set him on a path that would intertwine his life with music. In 1955, 8-year-old Freddie boarded a ship to India at his mother's arrangement. He was sent to St. Peter's School to complete his secondary education. At first, everything about his new school felt unfamiliar. His eyes were met with things he had never seen on the small island. Over time, his initial curiosity grew into a deep interest in subjects like art, music, and theater. Yet, no one seemed to recognize any artistic talent in him, except for his aunt. At the time, Freddie was still a shy and introverted child, rarely showing his abilities to others. But during a simple choir performance, his aunt noticed something special in his voice. She suggested that his parents enroll him in piano lessons, marking his first formal introduction to music. 3 years later, as his piano skills improved, Freddie gained confidence in his musical abilities. He took his first step forward, playing the piano in front of his friends. Impressed by his talent, his friends invited him to join a newly formed band. This was his first close encounter with rock music. However, he didn't take on the role of the lead singer. Instead, he remained in the background, quietly playing the piano. At this stage, Freddie still lacked the confidence to stand in the spotlight, perhaps due to his prominent front teeth, which made him self-conscious. Despite this, his time in secondary school was filled with happiness, and his passion for rock music grew stronger. 8 years in India passed in the blink of an eye. Reluctantly, Freddie left St. Peter's School and returned to his island home, a place where rock music was virtually non-existent. But by then, a seed had already been planted in his heart. Back home, he eagerly collected every bit of information about pop music from magazines. He longed to go to England, to be part of the rock revolution that was sweeping through the country. 1963 was a groundbreaking year for British rock. The Beatles, a group of 4 young men from Liverpool, made their debut and introduced a fresh style of rock with their song Yesterday. That same year, Freddie's life took a dramatic turn. In December, Britain's colonial grip on its territories was weakening, and a revolution broke out on his island. Gun violence and massacres became widespread, turning the once peaceful place into a playground for death. Freddie's father had worked for the British government, making their family a potential target for the revolutionary forces. To escape the turmoil, they had no choice but to flee to England. However, life in England was far from the comfort they had once known. The family settled in an old stone house on the outskirts of London, struggling to adapt to the cold and unfamiliar environment. But Freddie remained optimistic. He reassured his parents, encouraging them to believe that moving to England had been the right decision. Meanwhile, he worked hard to gain admission to an art school and immersed himself in London's vibrant music scene, attending concerts and social events. Determined to chase his dream, he began writing lyrics, scribbling song ideas on scraps of paper whenever inspiration struck. To earn money for concert tickets, he even took a job as a baggage handler at an airport. During this time, he pushed himself to become braver and more confident, taking one step at a time toward his musical aspirations. Meanwhile, as Freddie quietly worked toward his dreams, the British rock scene was undergoing a massive transformation. In 1967, as the Beatles and the Rolling Stones were bringing rock music to new heights, an African-American guitarist arrived in the UK. With his wild guitar solos and unique performance style, he injected a raw energy into British rock. Fans across the country were mesmerized by him, including a future superstar, Freddie, and a future legendary guitarist, Brian May. At the time, Freddie lived just a few hundred meters away from Brian, yet their lives had not yet intersected. However, their shared admiration for Jimi Hendrix would become the first step in their fates intertwining. Like Freddie, Brian became obsessed with watching Hendrix perform live. Back in 1964, Brian had formed a band called 1984. As the band gained popularity among students and couples, Freddie became acquainted with Brian and frequently visited the pub where the band's lead singer performed. However, 1984 failed to make an impact on the British rock scene. Before long, Brian left the band to focus on his studies, and he barely had time to get to know his future bandmate, Freddie. As a result, the two continued to move in their separate circles until fate brought them together again. Between 1967 and 1968, Freddie switched majors from fashion design to graphic design. In his new program, he met Tim, a friend of Brian's, and the two quickly became close. It was through Tim that Brian and Freddie were formally introduced. By this time, Brian had already formed a new band with Tim and a new drummer, Roger Taylor, who would later become Queen's drummer. This band, Smile, had ambitious dreams of making a name for themselves in the competitive rock scene. However, at this stage, Freddie still hadn't found the key to unlocking his full potential. By 1970, Freddie had become immersed in the British rock scene, performing with bands such as Ibex and Sour Milk Sea. During this period, he often traveled across the country with band members, crammed into vans filled with musical equipment. Over time, he transformed from a shy performer into a supremely confident showman, crafting attention-grabbing stage antics like his signature half-microphone stand and flamboyant moves. Yet, despite his evolution as a performer, success remained elusive. In the ruthless music industry, his band struggled to gain traction, and the lack of financial returns took a toll on the members. Ultimately, both bands disbanded in frustration, unable to break through. Meanwhile, Smile wasn't faring much better. Although they released new songs and went on tour, they remained an unnoticed opening act. Eventually, creative differences led their lead singer, Tim, to leave the band. But in a twist of fate, this departure set the stage for the birth of Queen. In 1970, after a series of ups and downs, Freddie joined Smile on Tim's recommendation. The band soon rebranded as Queen. The following year, after going through 3 different bassists, John Deacon joined the lineup, solidifying Queen's formation. However, much like Smile before them, Queen remained stuck playing in small pubs, struggling to attract attention. To chase their dream of stardom, they first had to find a way to survive. The band's members took on odd jobs. Freddie and Roger sold clothes in street markets, while Brian worked as a temporary math teacher. The 1970s saw an explosion of rock bands, making it incredibly difficult to stand out and achieve fame. For Queen, gaining recognition in an era with limited media exposure required a stroke of luck. But as Brian May always said, perseverance would eventually pay off. Finally, their moment arrived. In 1970, the band was determined to break free from the small pub circuit and aimed to produce a high-quality demo tape to pitch themselves to record labels. However, they couldn't afford the expensive studio fees. Without money, they had to find another way. Leveraging their network, they scoured for an affordable recording studio. Fortunately, they learned about a studio looking for a band to test its soundproofing, and since they were the first to call, they secured the opportunity. During this recording session, they caught the attention of Neptune Productions. When Queen later started shopping their demo tape around, Neptune, in partnership with Trident Studios, was the first to approach them. They offered the band access to a top-tier recording studio for free, leading to Queen's first major contract. With newfound support, the band could finally unleash their creativity. Between 2 a.m. and 7 a.m., Trident Studios belonged exclusively to Queen. During these late-night hours, their imagination ran wild, and inspiration flowed freely. To achieve the sound they envisioned, they went as far as altering Trident's unique acoustics. They moved the drums from the corner to the center of the room and filled the space with microphones, everything to make the recording feel like a live performance. Freddie Mercury's ideas were always unconventional. He wanted to break away from the norm and create something truly unique. With Freddie's eccentric vision and Brian May's meticulous precision, Queen produced their debut album, Queen. However, success did not come instantly. The band faced repeated failures. On July 13, 1973, their first album was released under Queen Records, but sales were dismal, and the media was less than kind. Crescent Express likened the album to a barrel of aged vinegar, while other critics dismissed them as nothing more than flamboyant jesters. Although they boldly proclaimed their greatness in public, such criticism took an emotional toll. On London's Route 9 bus home, Freddie confided in a friend about his despair, admitting he had no idea what to do if the band failed. Just as his friend was about to comfort him, Freddie suddenly lifted his head and joked that he had no intention of spending his life in an art studio. His unexpected remark made his friend burst into laughter. This period of uncertainty and struggle reflected the band's situation, yet they never doubted their abilities. Though their first album was a commercial disappointment, the setback only fueled their determination. The fire of creativity burned even brighter in their eyes. By August, Queen was back in the studio, ready to record their second album, Queen 2. This time, they pushed the limits of studio production, incorporating piano, organ, castanets, and orchestral elements, determined to create a grand and majestic soundscape. Pouring their boundless creativity into the album, they meticulously crafted every track. But instead of rushing to release it, they took a different approach. The band decided to build momentum through live performances, using concerts to boost their reputation. Though they initially toured as an opening act for other bands, they seized every opportunity to showcase their talent. On stage with Mott the Hoople, they promoted their album and generated buzz. During their Liverpool show, Freddie won over local soccer fans by shouting, "Nice one, Kevin," a reference that earned him roaring applause. In Birmingham, a city known for its tough crowds, Queen captivated the audience with their flamboyant rock sound. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, their manager, Ronnie, spent £20,000 on networking efforts, frequently treating industry insiders to meals on behalf of the band in hopes of securing more exposure. His efforts finally paid off when Queen landed a spot on television. On February 21, 1974, the band made their TV debut on Top of the Pops. That night, the band members huddled together outside a closed electronics store, watching their own performance through the display window. As they stood in the cold, they had a feeling that everything was about to change with the coming of spring. On March 8, 1974, Queen 2 was officially released, and within a month, it soared to number 5 on the charts. By then, the name Queen had spread like dandelion seeds, landing in every corner where it could no longer be ignored. They had become a sensation in the UK, but their ambitions stretched far beyond their home country. They had their sights set on the American market. The band planned a tour across the United States, starting in the Midwest and working their way to the Northeast. They poured their hearts into their performances, with the usually reserved Brian even breaking out windmill guitar moves on stage. But despite their relentless efforts, they failed to gain widespread popularity. Instead, the grueling schedule took a toll on their health. The breaking point came in Boston, where Brian fell seriously ill with hepatitis, forcing the tour to come to an abrupt end. To make matters worse, their album failed to gain traction in the US. The disappointment of their American tour and Brian's illness forced the band to take a step back and reevaluate. Determined to push forward, they returned to the studio to work on their third album, Sheer Heart Attack. As the title suggested, they were ready to deliver a seismic shock to the rock world. On November 1, 1974, the album was officially released. Prior to that, they had once again appeared on Top of the Pops, where their performance of Killer Queen sparked an intense reaction. A combination of aggressive promotion and the album's undeniable quality propelled Sheer Heart Attack to #2 on the charts. But before long, harsh reality yanked them back down to earth. Despite the album's massive success, the band found themselves buried under a mountain of bills from their management company. Only then did they realize that, beyond paying their manager's salary, they were also responsible for covering all business-related expenses. Studio fees charged by the hour, separate PR costs, venue rentals, everything was billed to them. Their contract was heavily skewed in favor of Trident Studios, leaving them with barely any financial returns. Outwardly, they shined like stars, but in reality, they were still scraping by on government assistance. Queen was broke. Freddie and his girlfriend crammed into a tiny apartment, using a piano as a headboard to save space, and surviving on frozen fish sticks. John couldn't even afford to save for his wedding. Faced with financial ruin, the band made a bold decision to sever ties with Trident and sign with EMI, even though doing so meant confronting an astronomical breach of contract penalty. With their backs against the wall, they had only one option: release another album. Failure would not only leave them drowning in debt, but also jeopardize their relationship with their new label. Yet, under this immense pressure, their creative potential exploded. History was quietly unfolding within the strings of their guitars. In 1970, before his rise to fame, Freddie Mercury was still experimenting with creativity at art school alongside his friends. One of his early lyrics stunned everyone: "Mama just killed a man." 5 years later, he stepped into Rockfield Studios with those very words, determined to bring his grand vision to life. However, recording the song proved far more challenging than expected. It needed the emotional depth of a ballad, the grandeur of an opera, and the raw energy of hard rock. Blending these styles seamlessly was a near impossible task, but the band saw innovation not as an obstacle, but as a stepping stone. "We always take on challenges head-on," they declared. Under Freddie's leadership, Queen embarked on an epic recording journey. To capture the song's multi-layered vocals, they pushed the limits of their 24-track tape, even splicing additional tape onto the reels. Brian May played complex guitar sections repeatedly until his fingers blistered and bled, while Roger Taylor rehearsed his harmonies to the point of vocal cord strain. This grueling process lasted over a month, with the master tape wearing thin from endless retakes, until, finally, every musical phrase flowed together seamlessly. Just as they realized Bohemian Rhapsody was destined for greatness, reality hit hard. Executives at EMI, after listening to the song, dismissed it outright. "We don't get it," they said bluntly, rejecting it as a single because radio stations only play 3-minute songs. Unwilling to compromise, Freddie and the band clashed, with their new label reaching a deadlock. A few days later, unwilling to accept defeat, Queen took matters into their own hands. They approached a DJ at London's Capital Radio and played Bohemian Rhapsody for him. He was blown away. With his support, the song bypassed EMI entirely and reached British audiences directly. However, the backlash from music critics was swift and brutal. Many simply couldn't categorize the song. But the public thought differently. Demand skyrocketed, with fans rushing to buy the record, only to find it hadn't even been released yet. EMI was left with no choice but to relent and officially launch Bohemian Rhapsody as a single. Its success was staggering. The song shot to the top of the charts like a rocket, holding the #1 spot for 9 weeks and staying in the top 10 for a total of 17 weeks. It was a battle cry for Queen, who, after facing setbacks, clawed their way back from the trenches and charged forward toward rock immortality. For the next decade, Queen showed no signs of slowing down. Their lives revolved around one thing: making music, release an album, go on tour, finish the tour, record another album. They worked tirelessly, producing hit after hit. The 1977 album News of the World gave birth to stadium anthems We Will Rock You and We Are the Champions, which became iconic in sports arenas worldwide. In 1978, Don't Stop Me Now became the ultimate driving song for car enthusiasts. Their 1982 collaboration with David Bowie, Under Pressure, topped the UK charts. The creative explosion continued into 1984 with hits like Radio GA, Hammer to Fall, and I Want to Break Free dominating the airwaves. But with fame and fortune came excess. Indulgence seeped into the band's lifestyle. Freddie's life began to spiral, alcohol, drugs, and reckless encounters started taking their toll. The band, once inseparable, began drifting apart. Outside of touring, they barely saw each other anymore. Freddie continued living a life of indulgence, remaining at the carefree age of 26, while his bandmates had long settled down, building families and raising children. At this point, he was surrounded by a group of people with ulterior motives. These individuals not only squandered his wealth, but also sowed discord between him and the band. For example, Paul Prenter, who served as Freddie's personal assistant, did nothing to protect his well-being. Instead, he dragged Freddie into the depths of drugs and promiscuity, fulfilling his own desires by providing drugs and sexual partners, while controlling Freddie's life and attempting to break up the band, encouraging Freddie to go solo. These problems began to surface in 1974 after the release of Sheer Heart Attack. That day, Freddie confessed to his girlfriend that he had discovered his attraction to men and immediately proposed ending their relationship. From that moment on, people like Paul Prenter, with hidden agendas, started to invade his life. Despite enjoying the vanity that fame brought him during these years of glory, Freddie remained a lonely child, much like the one he expressed in Somebody to Love, always searching for a confidant to share his life with, only to be met with deceit, exploitation, and betrayal. It wasn't until a decade later that he began to understand that the people who truly loved him had always been quietly by his side, enduring all the storms with him. In 1985, Freddie fired Paul Prenter, finally escaping his chaotic lifestyle. However, this act severed Paul's financial support, and in retaliation, Paul exposed Freddie's private life to the public. Suddenly, Freddie was thrust into the media spotlight. But by then, Freddie was no longer concerned with such distractions. He was about to reunite with the band to perform at the most monumental rock charity event in history, Live Aid. After this performance, Queen would undergo a milestone transformation. On July 13, 1985, London's Wembley Stadium gathered the top musicians from various eras. The global audience not only witnessed legendary performances from rock icons Led Zeppelin and the Rolling Stones, but also saw the rise of Madonna and the stunning performance of U2. But when the opening piano chords of Bohemian Rhapsody echoed at 6:40 p.m., the world held its breath. Queen's moment of glory was about to arrive. The sound of Bohemian Rhapsody filled the stadium, with 80,000 fans singing in unison, their waving arms resembling crashing waves, offering no respite before the rhythm of Radio GA took over. Led by Freddie, affectionately known by fans as Uncle Freddie, the entire crowd was swept up in a breathtaking display of sonic interaction. When the heavy metal riff of Hammer to Fall kicked in, the stadium erupted once again. After a brief pause, the band ignited a new wave of enthusiasm with the country rock style of Crazy Little Thing Called Love. The final peak arrived with We Will Rock You and We Are the Champions, pushing the atmosphere to its limits. In the epic harmonies, the legendary performance reached its perfect conclusion. No one wanted it to end, and even the members of Queen were stirred with emotion. They began to treasure the time spent making music together. After nearly breaking apart over the past decade, the band's relationship was miraculously restored after this performance. They were determined to continue fighting for their musical dreams and to maintain their top-tier level of excellence. However, Freddie was about to face an even more severe challenge in life. In April 1987, doctors confirmed that he had tested positive for HIV. In fact, 2 years earlier, sensing something was wrong, he had fully devoted himself to music creation. In 1986, the band completed the classic album A Kind of Magic, and in May of the same year, Freddie began his final world tour. During this time, he greedily enjoyed every moment spent traveling the world with the band and singing for his fans. After the tour ended, his health deteriorated rapidly, forcing him to retire from the stage permanently. Nevertheless, he continued to participate in music production. In 1987, he finally had the chance to collaborate with opera diva Montserrat Cabal, and together they created the theme song for the 1992 Barcelona Olympics, Barcelona. After completing Miracles and Irony in 1989, Freddie Mercury began quietly living out the remainder of his life. It wasn't until 1991, when he could no longer sing, that he decided to stop taking medication and calmly wait for death's arrival. At the age of 16, during the revolution on Zanzibar Island, he witnessed lives being lost daily. When he and a friend first confronted death, his friend asked, "How long do you think you'll live?" Freddie replied, 45 years. When asked why, he said he didn't know, but he always had a feeling it would be 45. On that day, it seemed that fate had etched Freddie's prophecy into the wheel of time. On November 21, 1991, death, as predicted, arrived and took Freddie away. On his final night, as he waved goodbye to the world, he spoke his last words to his beloved fans in the gentlest of voices. "Good night, sweet dreams." A legendary figure left the world he loved too soon, yet without regret. He had achieved all his musical aspirations, and his life had shone with the brightest of lights. There is no perfect person in this world, and we love Freddie Mercury because he shared with us the simplest, most profound emotional resonance. His rock music became the amplifier for these emotions. In We Are the Champions, we hear the determination and will fight till the end. And in Love of My Life, we feel the deep longing in Come Back, Don't Leave Me. The life essence carried in those notes mirrors the highs and lows of his own journey, resonating subtly with the joys and sorrows of ordinary people. Although the golden age of rock is slowly fading and the first generation of rock legends are passing away, young people in the new era may no longer be familiar with the name Freddie Mercury, but his voice continues to flow through the river of time. If you want to get to know this legend, he will forever live on in the eternal symphony of Queen.